The smell of hickory smoke curled through the evening air as I stepped onto the flagstone patio. Fairy lights draped across the pergola glimmered like captive fireflies, their glow softening the sharp edges of the modern outdoor kitchen my parents had splurged on. Crystal flutes of champagne clinked in a casual toast, and the low murmur of laughter swelled under the golden wash of sunset. I stood a little apart, the stem of my own glass cool against my fingers. My navy silk blouse caught the faintest breeze, brushing against skin still warm from the late summer sun. From here I could see the perfectly manicured lawns stretching toward the distant lake, the scent of rosemary and charred steak rising like an expensive spell. No one had so much as glanced in my direction. Not when I arrived. Not now, as I lingered near the railing. Dad held court near the grill, wearing a crisp linen shirt that looked better suited to a yacht than a barbecue. Mom fluttered between guests, neighbors, business partners, her diamond tennis bracelet winking each time she gestured. I took a slow sip of champagne, its bubbles sharp and celebratory on my tongue, and felt the familiar ache beneath the practiced smile I'd perfected over the years. Finally, I stepped forward, letting my heels click against the stone. The laughter faded just enough for my voice to carry. "Did you?" I said, with a smile that betrayed nothing. "Remember my birthday?" The scent of hickory smoke faded, replaced in my mind by the sharp tang of burnt coffee and the stale air of a house that always seemed to hold its breath. I was 19 again, standing at the threshold of my parents' sunlit breakfast nook, clutching a folded letter that would change everything. Mom sat at the marble island, her phone pressed to her ear, diamonds flashing as she waved me off without looking. Dad scanned the Wall Street Journal, one hand wrapped around a mug that had been reheated 3 times. The faint buzz of the refrigerator was the loudest sound between us. "I got in," I finally blurted, my voice higher than I intended. "The Art Institute in Chicago. Full scholarship." For a beat, only the newspaper rustled. Then Dad lowered it, eyebrows drawn into the crease I knew too well. "Olivia," he said, careful and clipped, "that's impractical." Mom's conversation ended abruptly. She set her phone down with a decisive click. "Sweetheart, you're bright enough for law school or finance. Why throw that away for—" Her manicured fingers fluttered vaguely. "Painting?" My cheeks burned. "It's not just painting. It's design, installation. This is what I want." Dad's sigh cut through me. "Want doesn't pay the bills." My hands trembled around the letter. The words of congratulations now felt like a fragile secret I needed to protect. Before I could reply, a gentle voice came from the doorway behind me. "Sounds like you've got something worth fighting for," Grandma Lila said. She'd been staying with us that month, her silver hair tied back with a faded blue ribbon. She crossed the room and pressed something into my palm, a small, antique silver locket etched with vines. "My mother gave me this when I left home. Reminds you where you came from, but never lets you forget where you're headed." Mom glanced away, uninterested. Dad returned to his paper. I closed my fingers around the locket and felt its cool weight. That night, I packed the essentials into a duffel bag. Grandma slipped an envelope of travel money into the side pocket when no one was watching. As the train pulled away the next morning, the sun caught the locket at my throat. For the first time, the horizon belonged entirely to me. The memory of that train ride still lives in my chest like a second heartbeat. Chicago rolled past the window in a blur of steel and smoke while the locket rested cool against my skin, a quiet promise of the life I refused to let slip away. My first apartment wasn't much, just a sliver of space above a bakery that started kneading dough at 3 a.m. The scent of yeast became my alarm clock, the rattle of delivery trucks my lullaby. I worked days at a corner coffee shop, nights at the Art Institute studio, and weekends cleaning offices to cover what the scholarship didn't. Some mornings my hands ached so badly from scrubbing floors and stretching canvases that I could barely hold a pencil. Still I drew. Professor Ellis noticed me first. She was the kind of mentor who smelled faintly of sandalwood and wore linen suits like armor. One afternoon she paused behind my easel and studied my charcoal sketches with a slow, appraising tilt of her head. "You have an eye for spaces," she said, tapping the paper lightly. Not just art. Architecture. Installation. Think bigger, Olivia. Her words became my fuel. I swapped late-night shifts for drafting tables, devoured textbooks on spatial design, and volunteered for every installation project that would have me. There were setbacks, grant applications rejected, proposals returned with polite "no thanks," days when I stared at my bank balance and wondered if my parents' warnings had been prophecy. But each small win kept me moving. My first gallery commission, a pop-up exhibit that transformed an abandoned warehouse into a living forest of light and sound. The local arts magazine called it a triumph of immersive storytelling. The check barely covered my rent, but the article, clipped and taped above my desk, felt like a key. Years passed in a blur of construction dust and midnight sketches. I launched a boutique design firm out of a cramped co-working space. By the third year, we were booked months ahead. Corporations came calling. Luxury hotels. Even city planners who wanted art to breathe life into public spaces. Through it all, my family's calls were brief and carefully neutral. Mom would ask if I was still in that city, Dad if I had found something stable yet. I never mentioned the awards, the seven-figure contracts, or the growing list of clients with names they would recognize. I sent birthday cards, but little else. It wasn't spite. It was survival. My success was a quiet garden I refused to let them trample. One evening, after signing a partnership deal with an international resort chain, I stood alone in my new loft, a sun-drenched expanse of white brick and towering windows, and finally allowed myself to exhale. I touched the silver locket at my throat. Grandma Lila's ribbon still lay folded inside. Her words from that morning years ago whispered back to me, something worth fighting for. I had found it, and, for now, it would remain my secret. Back in the present, the evening breeze carried the scent of cedar smoke and garlic butter across the Bennett backyard. Golden light from the string lanterns haloed the guests like some glossy magazine spread. My heels sank slightly into the damp grass as I walked toward the grill, where Dad carved thick slices of ribeye for a cluster of his golfing friends. No one had answered my question. "Did you remember my birthday?" I repeated, softly enough to sound almost amused. The clink of champagne flutes dulled to a hush. Dad cleared his throat, eyes flicking toward Mom. She blinked, her diamond bracelet catching the lantern light. "Oh, Olivia," she said too brightly, "we were going to celebrate this weekend. You know how busy things have been." Busy. I let the smile stay on my lips. The navy silk of my blouse whispered against my skin as I pulled a slim leather folder from my tote and set it on the patio table. "I understand busy," I said, my voice low but clear. "I've been a little busy myself." Inside the folder, a single document waited, tonight's quiet invitation to the truth. I slid it toward them. Dad frowned and flipped it open. The logo of my design firm gleamed at the top. Bennett Spatial Arts, a name I'd chosen partly out of defiance, partly to honor the family name they thought I'd abandoned. Beneath it, bold type spelled out the partnership I'd signed last month with an international resort chain, one of Dad's own longtime clients. His jaw tightened. You designed their new flagship? And their next 3, I said, meeting his eyes. They asked me to lead the entire creative expansion. A low murmur rippled through the guests. Mom reached for the document, her perfectly manicured nails trembling. "This is your company?" I nodded. "Built it from scratch. 7 years. 12 employees. 6 major awards." I let the words settle, the truth heavy as the summer dusk. From the far edge of the patio came the sound of approaching footsteps. Professor Ellis, still sharp as ever in a cream linen blazer, emerged from the shadows with a knowing smile. She'd been in town for a conference, and I'd invited her quietly, certain this night would need a witness. Dad's friends exchanged glances, their golf course banter silenced. The sizzle of the grill was the only sound. Dad finally spoke, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "Olivia, why didn't you tell us?" I ran a thumb over the silver locket at my throat. "Because every time I try to share my dreams, you called them impractical. I needed to build this without your doubts echoing in my ears." The quiet stretched until even the crickets seemed to pause. Mom set the folder down carefully. We misjudged you." Her voice cracked on the last word. Professor Ellis placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Your daughter is one of the most visionary designers I've met in 30 years, she said evenly. A hush fell over the gathering, thick and electric. I let the moment breathe. Then, with the same composure I'd carried through every late-night studio and client meeting, I said, "Tonight, I came to celebrate. Not just my birthday, my life. The one I built when no one believed I could." The lanterns swayed in the breeze. Somewhere beyond the lake, a single firework flared and faded, leaving a trail of silent sparks across the darkening sky. A slow wind rustled the pergola vines, scattering the scent of grilled rosemary through the stillness. For the first time all evening, every pair of eyes was fixed on me, not as the wandering daughter or the family's creative phase, but as someone they had never fully seen. Dad cleared his throat, the sound oddly small. "Olivia?" He stopped, words failing him. I rested my palms lightly on the table's cool surface. "I'm not here for apologies," I said, my voice calm but unshakable. "I'm here because I want a family, but it has to be different from the one I left." Mom's brow tightened. "Different how?" I let my gaze drift over each of them. My parents, my brother Mark leaning awkwardly against the deck railing, even Aunt Rachel, who had always smirked at my little art projects. The silver locket at my throat warmed against my skin. "Respect," I began. "Real respect for the choices we make, even when they're not what you pictured. That means no more dismissing Mark when he talks about starting his own catering business." Mark's eyes widened. You knew?" I smiled. "You think I can't smell ambition when it's in the kitchen? You're brilliant, but you deserve support, not jokes." He blinked hard, biting back a grin. I turned to Aunt Rachel. "And you, stop treating vulnerability like weakness. It's cost you friendships. And it nearly cost us ours." Her smirk softened, the corners of her mouth twitching into something closer to regret. Finally, I faced my parents. "If we're going to be in each other's lives, you have to meet me where I am. No more backhanded comments about real jobs. No more pretending you know what success looks like. And when Mark takes his leap, you cheer for him the way you should have cheered for me." Mom swallowed, diamonds flashing as she reached for Dad's hand. He nodded slowly, his expression stripped of pride. "We can do that," he said quietly, "if you'll let us try." Compassion welled in my chest, soft, but firm as steel. "Trying is all I ask, but it has to be real. If it isn't, I'll step back again. My life is too full, too hard one, to shrink for anyone." A single cricket resumed its song, as if signaling the world to start moving again. Mark let out a shaky laugh and raised his glass. "To Olivia," he said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "And to doing better." Glasses lifted around the table, crystal catching the lantern glow. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of something like home, a home built not on expectation, but on choice. I touched the silver locket and breathed in the night air. Grandma Lila's words, long ago, whispered through me like a blessing, something worth fighting for. The night eased into a softer quiet after the toast, the kind that settles when old wounds finally stop bleeding. Lanterns flickered gently, their golden light painting the patio in slow-moving shadows. Beyond the lawn, the lake caught the moon in a silver ribbon that rippled with the breeze. Later, when the guests drifted toward the driveway and the grill hissed its final breath, Mom joined me at the edge of the garden. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and for once didn't fill the silence with small talk. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught only a faint glimmer, less a statement now than a simple circle of light. "I should have listened," she said finally, her voice low enough that only the night could hear it. "Not just tonight, years ago. I'm sorry." I studied her profile, the way the moon softened the lines that years of expectation had carved. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, patient unfolding. But tonight was a beginning. Across the yard, Dad and Mark were laughing, really laughing while they stacked empty plates. The sound was unguarded, unpracticed. For the first time in years, it didn't carry the weight of competition or judgment. I touched the silver locket at my throat. Inside, Grandma Lila's faded ribbons still lay folded and safe. I could almost feel her hand on my shoulder, the quiet pride in her eyes. My life stretched ahead like the lake in moonlight, wide, luminous, entirely my own. The family I stood beside now wasn't the same one I'd left.
And neither was I.
I turned toward Mom and Dad, toward Mark, toward the home that was beginning, at last, to feel like a place we could build together. Grandma's words echoed through me, steady as my heartbeat, something worth fighting for. I smiled, the night air cool and sure against my skin. My birthday, I said softly, more to myself than anyone else, was the perfect day for all of us to start again.